If your hydrangeas are looking a little tired in August, you might be tempted to do what many gardeners do: water more, fertilize more, prune more, and try to fix everything at once. But August is not the month to panic. In fact, one of the biggest mistakes you can make with hydrangeas in late summer is giving them too much attention in the wrong way. Your hydrangea doesn't necessarily need more products, more fertilizer, or more pruning. What it needs most is the right balance of moisture, protection, healthy roots, and a little patience. And today, we're going to talk about the simple August care that can make the difference between a hydrangea that struggles through late summer and one that finishes the season looking strong and beautiful. Welcome back to Fresh Homegrown Harvest, where we focus on practical gardening advice that helps you grow a healthier, more productive, and more beautiful garden without making things unnecessarily complicated. If you have hydrangeas growing around your home, stay with me, because some of the most important care decisions you can make for them right now are surprisingly simple. And one of those decisions involves something gardeners often get completely wrong: water. Not just whether you water, but how you water, where the water goes, how often you water, and what the soil is doing underneath the plant. Let's start with the most important August principle: check the soil before you reach for the hose. August can bring intense heat, strong sunlight, dry winds, and long periods without meaningful rainfall. The surface of the soil may look dry, while the deeper root zone still has plenty of moisture. On the other hand, the surface can look fine while the roots underneath are becoming dangerously dry. That's why simply looking at the leaves isn't always enough. Before watering, push your finger into the soil near the plant, or use a simple soil moisture check. You want to understand what's happening around the roots rather than reacting to every little change in the leaves. Hydrangeas generally appreciate consistent moisture, but consistent moisture does not mean constantly wet soil. That's an important distinction. A hydrangea sitting in saturated soil can experience problems just as a severely drought-stressed plant can. Roots need access to both water and oxygen. When the soil stays excessively wet for too long, air spaces can become filled with water, creating an environment where roots struggle. When the soil becomes extremely dry, the plant can become stressed and leaves may wilt, curl, or develop dry edges. The goal in August is not to keep the soil soaked. The goal is to avoid extreme swings between bone dry and waterlogged. This is where deep watering becomes so much more useful than frequent little splashes. If your hydrangea needs water, give the root zone a thorough drink rather than sprinkling a tiny amount over the surface every day. A shallow splash may wet the top layer of soil without providing enough moisture deeper down where the roots are growing. Then that thin layer dries out quickly under the August sun, and you find yourself watering again and again. Deep, thorough watering when needed can encourage moisture to reach farther into the root zone and reduce the cycle of constant surface drying. But here's another mistake: assuming every hydrangea needs exactly the same amount of water. It doesn't. A hydrangea planted in full morning sun with afternoon shade may have very different needs from one receiving strong afternoon sunlight. A mature plant with a large root system may respond differently from a newly planted shrub. A hydrangea in sandy soil may dry out faster than one growing in moisture-retentive soil. Container hydrangeas can dry out much faster than plants growing in the ground. So instead of following a rigid watering schedule, pay attention to the conditions around your specific plant. August is also the perfect time to look closely at your mulch. Mulch is one of those simple garden tools that can make your watering efforts much more effective. A reasonable layer of organic mulch around a hydrangea can help reduce evaporation, moderate soil temperature, and protect the root zone from rapid moisture changes. This can be especially valuable during hot weather. But mulch needs to be used correctly. Keep it away from directly touching the base of the stems. You want the root zone covered, not the crown of the plant buried under a pile of wet material. If your mulch has become thin, you can refresh it. You don't necessarily need to create a huge mound. A moderate, even layer is usually enough to provide benefits without causing other problems. Organic materials such as shredded bark, composted leaves, or other appropriate garden mulch can work well depending on what is available in your area. The important thing is to think of mulch as a moisture management tool, not as something that should be piled against the plant simply because more must be better. And that brings us to another August mistake, fertilizing because the plant looks stressed. When a hydrangea is wilting during a hot afternoon, some gardeners immediately assume it needs fertilizer, but fertilizer is not a cure for heat stress. In fact, applying unnecessary fertilizer during stressful conditions can create additional problems. Hydrangeas don't need to be constantly pushed into new growth. By August, depending on your climate and the type of hydrangea, the plant may already be transitioning away from the rapid growth of early summer. Before feeding, ask yourself why you're feeding. Is there a genuine nutrient issue? Has a soil test indicated a deficiency? Is your particular hydrangea and growing situation calling for additional nutrients? Or are you simply worried because the leaves don't look perfect? Those are very different situations. Healthy gardening isn't about constantly adding something. Sometimes the best decision is to leave a healthy plant alone. Excessive nitrogen is particularly worth thinking about. Too much nitrogen can encourage lush leafy growth, but that doesn't automatically mean more flowers or a healthier plant. In some situations, pushing soft new growth late in the season can also make the plant less prepared for changing weather. Rather than chasing fast growth, focus on maintaining good growing conditions. Healthy roots, appropriate moisture, suitable light, and reasonable soil fertility are much more important than trying to force your hydrangea to grow faster.
Now, let's talk about sunlight, because August is when the difference between enough sun and too much sun can become very obvious. Hydrangeas are not all identical, and their light requirements vary by species and cultivar. Some can handle more sun when moisture is consistently available, while others perform better with protection from intense afternoon heat. If your plant is exposed to harsh afternoon sunlight and repeatedly wilts despite adequate soil moisture, that is a clue worth paying attention to. You don't necessarily need to move an established hydrangea in August. Digging up a mature shrub during intense summer heat can create additional stress. Instead, think about what you can do to reduce environmental stress now and make a better long-term plan later. Nearby trees, structures, shade cloth where appropriate, and thoughtful landscape placement can all influence how much heat reaches the plant. If you discover that your hydrangea is simply in the wrong location, remember the lesson and plan any major relocation for a more suitable season in your climate. One of the most important things you can do in August is observe the leaves carefully. Healthy-looking foliage gives you useful information, but damaged leaves can also tell a story. Brown edges may be associated with heat, drought stress, inconsistent moisture, or other issues. Yellowing leaves can have multiple causes. Drooping can happen during heat, but it can also be associated with root problems or inadequate moisture. Don't diagnose everything from one symptom. Look at the whole plant and the environment around it. Take a step back and ask a few simple questions. Has the weather been unusually hot? Has rainfall been low? Is the soil actually dry below the surface? Is the plant sitting in poorly drained soil? Has the plant recently been fertilized heavily? Is it receiving intense afternoon sun? Are there signs of pests? Has anything changed around the root zone? This kind of observation is far more useful than immediately buying another product. Now, let's discuss flowers. If your hydrangea has already produced beautiful blooms, August can be the time when those flowers begin to change. Some gardeners become concerned when flower heads start fading, drying, or changing color, but this is not necessarily a sign that the plant is dying. Hydrangea flower heads can naturally age as the season progresses. Depending on the variety, flowers may shift through different colors and textures before eventually drying. This is where deadheading becomes a personal garden choice rather than an automatic emergency task. Removing spent flowers can make the plant look tidier, but you should understand your hydrangea before making significant cuts. Some big-leaf hydrangeas, smooth hydrangeas, panicle hydrangeas, oak-leaf hydrangeas, and climbing hydrangeas can have different growth and flowering habits. Hydrangea is not one single care category. This is especially important if you're watching a hydrangea that didn't bloom as expected. The instinct is often to prune it harder, but lack of flowers doesn't automatically mean the plant needs more pruning. Sometimes the issue is winter damage. Sometimes the plant is too young, sometimes it has insufficient light. Sometimes excessive nitrogen has encouraged leafy growth. Sometimes the plant simply has a flowering habit that doesn't match what the gardener expected. And sometimes pruning at the wrong time removed the very buds that would have produced flowers. So if your hydrangea didn't bloom this year, don't punish it by cutting it back randomly in August. Instead, investigate. Learn what type it is. Find out whether it blooms on old wood or new wood. Look at its location and growing conditions. Then make your pruning decisions based on information rather than frustration. Another August task that deserves attention is weed control around the root zone. Weeds compete for water and nutrients, and during hot weather, that competition can become especially noticeable. But you don't need to dig aggressively around the base of your hydrangea. Hydrangea roots can extend through the surrounding soil, and careless cultivation can disturb them. Hand-pull weeds when practical, remove competing vegetation carefully, and maintain a clean but protected root zone.
This is another reason mulch is so useful. A good mulch layer can reduce the number of weeds that appear and make the ones that do appear easier to remove. Instead of spending your August constantly fighting weeds, create conditions that make weed pressure easier to manage. Gardening gets easier when you stop treating every problem as an emergency and start designing the environment to prevent problems in the first place. You should also inspect the plant for pests and signs of disease. Don't assume every imperfect leaf means something is seriously wrong. A few damaged leaves can happen in any garden. Look for patterns. Are many leaves affected? Is the damage increasing? Are insects visible? Are leaves covered with unusual spots or coatings? Are stems showing signs of damage? Is the plant declining overall? If you notice a persistent problem, identify the cause before reaching for a treatment. Avoid spraying products simply because you saw one insect. Gardens contain an enormous variety of insects, and not all insects are harmful. Some are pollinators, predators, decomposers, or simply visitors passing through. The goal isn't to create a completely insect-free hydrangea. The goal is to maintain a healthy plant and respond appropriately when a genuine pest problem develops. Watering technique matters too. When your hydrangea needs a drink, aim the water toward the soil rather than repeatedly soaking the flowers and foliage. Water reaching the root zone is what the plant needs most. Wetting leaves unnecessarily, especially late in the day, can create conditions that favor certain fungal problems in some environments. Morning watering is often a practical choice because it allows foliage that does get wet to dry as the day progresses. But don't turn that advice into another rigid rule. If a plant is severely dry and the only practical time you can water is later in the day, watering the root zone is generally more important than waiting for a perfect schedule. The larger principle is to provide the water where it is needed while avoiding unnecessary prolonged leaf wetness. August can also be a good time to examine your hydrangea's overall structure. Look for broken branches, damaged stems, or growth that is rubbing against other branches. However, distinguish between removing clearly damaged material and performing a major shaping operation. Those are not the same thing. If a branch is dead or broken, dealing with it may be sensible. But if your goal is to dramatically reshape the entire shrub, first make sure August is an appropriate pruning time for that specific hydrangea. And here's something many gardeners don't consider. Don't judge your hydrangea only by today's appearance. A garden is a living system, and plants respond to what happened weeks and months earlier. A hydrangea that looks stressed today may be experiencing root disturbance earlier in the season. A plant with fewer flowers may be showing the consequences of last year's pruning. A shrub that wilts quickly may be revealing a location problem that has existed for years. Instead of only asking, "How do I fix this today?" ask, "What is this plant telling me about its growing conditions?" That mindset can completely change the way you garden. Let's talk about containers for a moment, because potted hydrangeas can behave very differently from those planted in the ground. A container has a limited volume of soil, and that soil can heat up and dry out quickly during August. If your hydrangea is growing in a pot, check moisture more frequently than you would for an established plant in the ground. Make sure the container has adequate drainage. At the same time, don't assume that because the plant is thirsty on hot days, it should sit in a saucer full of stagnant water all the time.
Container plants also benefit from thoughtful placement. A location that is comfortable for a container hydrangea in spring may become brutally hot in August. If practical, consider whether the plant can receive bright light with protection from the harshest afternoon conditions. Just remember that any major change in light exposure should be gradual when possible, because plants can also respond poorly to sudden environmental changes. Another common mistake is moving a hydrangea repeatedly because the leaves wilt during hot weather. A plant can wilt temporarily during intense heat, even when the soil contains moisture. This is one reason checking the soil matters so much. If the soil is adequately moist and the plant recovers as temperatures fall, immediate watering may not be necessary. If the soil is dry and the plant remains stressed, watering becomes much more important. Learn to distinguish heat response from genuine drought stress. Now, here's the part I really want you to remember. August is not about making your hydrangea perfect. It's about helping it remain stable. Stable moisture, stable root conditions, stable light, stable nutrition, stable growing conditions. Plants don't need us constantly changing everything around them. Sometimes the greatest care is consistency.
If you have been watering every day simply because the calendar says August, stop and check the soil. If you've been fertilizing repeatedly because you want bigger flowers, step back and ask whether the plant actually needs more nutrients. If you've been pruning because the shrub looks messy, identify the hydrangea type before making major cuts. If you've been removing every fallen leaf and organic material around the plant, consider whether a healthy mulch layer could actually benefit the root zone. This is what I mean when I say most gardeners get August hydrangea care wrong. The mistake isn't caring too much. The mistake is confusing activity with care. You can spend an hour doing things to a hydrangea and still make its growing conditions worse. Meanwhile, another gardener might spend 5 minutes checking the soil, adjusting mulch, observing the plant, and leaving it alone, and achieve a much better result. Your hydrangea doesn't know how expensive your fertilizer is. It doesn't know how many gardening products you own. It doesn't care whether you followed a complicated schedule from a gardening calendar. It responds to its environment: moisture, roots, light, temperature, nutrients, space, timing. Those are the things that matter. And August is also a great time to prepare for what comes next. Don't wait until the first major weather change to start paying attention. Look at the health of your plant now. If the soil dries out extremely quickly, think about how you can improve moisture management. If the plant receives too much afternoon sun, consider what long-term changes might help. If you have been unsure which hydrangea you own, identify it now. If pruning has been confusing, research the flowering habit of your particular cultivar before the next pruning season arrives. You can even take photographs. Photograph the entire shrub. Photograph the leaves. Photograph the flowers. Photograph the base of the plant and the surrounding soil. These pictures can become incredibly useful next year. You can compare how the plant looked during August with how it looks at different points in the season. Gardening becomes much easier when you begin creating your own record instead of relying entirely on memory. Another thing to watch is rainfall. A heavy summer storm doesn't necessarily mean you can forget about moisture for the next several weeks. Rainfall can be uneven, especially around buildings, trees, slopes, and compacted areas. A storm might dump plenty of water in one part of the garden, while another area receives much less effective moisture. After significant rain, check the soil. Don't automatically water just because it's been several days, and don't assume the plant has enough moisture simply because there was a storm. The same principle applies to drought. If your region is experiencing unusually dry conditions, pay particular attention to newly planted hydrangeas and plants growing in exposed locations. Established shrubs may have larger root systems, but that doesn't mean they are immune to prolonged heat and drought. During difficult weather, your goal is to protect the root zone and avoid unnecessary stress. If you're growing hydrangeas for their beautiful blooms, remember that flower color can be influenced by several factors, including the variety and, in some cases, soil chemistry. Don't automatically pour amendments into the soil because you saw a video promising an instant color transformation. Changing soil chemistry is not something to do casually, and not every hydrangea responds the same way. First, identify the type of hydrangea you're growing and understand what actually influences its flower color. This is one of the larger lessons of gardening.
The more you understand your specific plant, the fewer unnecessary things you need to do. Instead of memorizing a giant list of universal rules, learn your plant. Know where it grows best. Know when it blooms. Know whether it flowers on old or new wood. Know how quickly its soil dries. Know how it responds to your summer conditions. That knowledge is far more powerful than simply buying more garden products. And if your hydrangea looks fantastic right now, congratulations. But don't suddenly start changing things because you think you need to prepare it for something. Sometimes the best care for a healthy plant is simply to maintain the conditions that are already working. Check the soil. Water when needed. Maintain mulch. Remove serious competition. Watch for pests and disease. Avoid unnecessary fertilizer. Be careful with pruning. Then step back and enjoy the garden. There is something satisfying in realizing that gardening isn't always about doing more. Sometimes it's about doing the right thing at the right time. A hydrangea in August can teach you that lesson beautifully. The plant is responding to months of weather, growth, flowering, pruning, watering, and soil conditions. You don't have to force it into perfection. You simply have to support the conditions that allow it to continue growing naturally. So, before you walk away from your garden today, I want you to perform a simple August hydrangea check. Look at the whole plant. Feel the soil several inches down. Check whether the root zone is dry or adequately moist. Look at the mulch. Make sure it isn't piled against the stems. Look underneath the leaves for unusual signs of pest activity. Examine the foliage for patterns of damage. Look at the flowers and ask whether they are simply aging naturally. Then think before you prune or fertilize.
If the soil is dry, water deeply and thoroughly enough to reach the root zone. If the soil is already moist, don't add more water just because the weather is hot. If the plant is healthy, don't fertilize simply because August has arrived. If the flowers are fading naturally, don't assume something is wrong. If you don't know what kind of hydrangea you have, identify it before making major pruning decisions. These simple choices can prevent some of the most common late summer mistakes. Most importantly, remember that a hydrangea does not need to be constantly rescued. Sometimes it simply needs the environment around its roots to remain comfortable. Consistency is powerful. A well-maintained root zone can help the plant handle summer stress better. Appropriate moisture can support healthy growth without creating waterlogged conditions. Proper mulch can reduce rapid moisture loss. Thoughtful pruning can protect future flowering. And patience can prevent you from making unnecessary changes that create new problems. So the next time you walk past your hydrangea on a hot August afternoon, don't immediately grab the hose. Stop for a moment. Look at the plant. Feel the soil. Check the mulch. Study the leaves. Ask yourself what the plant is actually telling you. That small pause can prevent overwatering, unnecessary fertilizing, and poorly timed pruning. And it can help you care for your hydrangea based on what it truly needs rather than what you assume it needs. If you found this helpful, make sure you're subscribed to Fresh Homegrown Harvest for more practical garden tips, seasonal growing advice, and simple ways to get more from your home garden. And if you have hydrangeas, tell me in the comments what yours looks like right now. Are the flowers still colorful? Are they starting to fade? Are the leaves holding up well in the summer heat? Or are you dealing with wilting, dry edges, or another problem? Share your experience, because your comment could help another gardener dealing with the same situation. And before you go, remember this: don't confuse attention with care. More water isn't always better. More fertilizer isn't always better. More pruning isn't always better. More products aren't always better. The best care is the care your particular plant actually needs. For hydrangeas in August, that often means paying close attention to moisture and root conditions while avoiding unnecessary stress. So check your soil before you water. Protect the root zone with appropriate mulch. Be careful with fertilizer. Understand your hydrangea before pruning. Watch the plant instead of reacting to every imperfect leaf, and give it the stability it needs to finish the growing season strong. Your garden doesn't need you to control everything. It needs you to understand what you're seeing. And once you learn that, caring for your hydrangeas becomes much simpler. Thanks for spending some time with me here at Fresh Homegrown Harvest. Keep growing, keep observing, and most importantly, keep enjoying the harvest and beauty your garden gives you back. I'll see you in the next one.